May 2009. George Fan sat in a quiet office at PopCap Games watching a cartoon sunflower dance to a catchy lo-fi tune. He'd spent years refining a simple premise: a suburban lawn, a horde of the undead, and a handful of genetically modified peas. It was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity, a game so perfectly balanced that it bridged the gap between hardcore strategy enthusiasts and grandmothers on their first iPad. Within months, Plants vs. Zombies wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon, a digital toy box that felt like it was made with genuine love and a singular creative vision. But in the shadows of this backyard utopia, a corporate predator was watching, ready to turn this Garden of Eden into a laboratory for monetization. Electronic Arts arrived with a $750 million check and a mandate to scale. And in the decade that followed, they didn't just expand the franchise, they lobotomized what was once a pristine, premium experience has been hollowed out, injected with predatory microtransactions, and re-released in remastered formats that stripped away the soul of the original. The vibrant art was replaced by sterile mobile assets, the music was compressed into tinny noise, and the gameplay was re-engineered to frustrate players into opening their wallets. This is the toxic truth behind the death of Plants vs. Zombies. The tragedy of the Plants vs. Zombies remastering saga begins with the fundamental misunderstanding of why the game worked in the first place. George Fan's original vision was a buy-to-play oasis. You paid your $20 and you owned a complete world. There were no energy bars, no gem packs, and no forced advertisements interrupting the rhythm of the Zen garden. It was a finished piece of art.
However, when EA took the reins in 2011, the industry was shifting toward the freemium model, a goldmine built on the backs of whales and psychological manipulation. EA didn't see a classic game, they saw an under-monetized asset. They began a systematic optimization process, starting with the mobile ports. What players were told was a high-definition remaster for modern screens was actually a Trojan horse for a new era of digital greed. As the original game was ported to newer versions of iOS and Android, the changes were subtle but sinister. The iconic art style, drawn with a quirky, handcrafted charm, began to lose its texture. High-resolution screens demanded cleaner lines, but in the process, the game lost its grit. The Dancing Zombie, originally a pitch-perfect homage to Michael Jackson's Thriller, was scrubbed from existence due to legal fears and replaced by a generic disco character that lacked the original's comedic bite. This was the first sign that the game was no longer a creative work, but a legal liability to be managed by a boardroom. The remastered versions weren't about preserving the history of the game, they were about sanitizing it for a global, ad-supported market. Then came the PvZ free era. EA eventually pulled the original paid version of the game from digital storefronts, replacing it with a free-to-play remaster that felt like a betrayal. Suddenly, the game's pacing was broken. The difficulty curves were tweaked to encourage the use of power-ups, items that could be purchased with real money to clear the screen of zombies instantly. This fundamentally broke the strategy. In the 2009 original, losing a level meant you needed a better plan. In the remastered version, losing a level meant you hadn't spent enough coins. The game's DNA was being rewritten from a puzzle to a toll booth. The remastering didn't stop at the gameplay.
The UI was cluttered with flashing icons, daily deals and seasonal passes that felt entirely alien to the suburban charm of the original lawn. PopCap's signature wit was replaced by generic marketing speak. The Zen Garden, once a peaceful meta game where you could tend to your plants and listen to the rain, was turned into a resource-generating machine that demanded you log in every few hours or miss out. It was a digital Skinner box disguised as a childhood favourite. The industry term for this is live service, but for fans of the original, it felt like watching a beloved neighbourhood park be torn down to build a casino. But the true Worst Remastering award arguably goes to the way EA handled the transition to modern consoles and PC launches. As the original game aged, it became increasingly difficult to run on modern operating systems. Instead of a faithful 4K restoration that preserved the original code, players were often forced to use buggy emulated versions or the hollowed-out mobile ports. The Game of the Year edition on Steam remains a glitchy mess for many, lacking the features and stability of the version people bought 15 years ago. Ubisoft or Sony might get flack for their remasterings, at least their games usually work. The Plants vs. Zombies remastering history is a graveyard of abandoned versions and broken promises. The human cost of this corporate remastering is perhaps the darkest chapter of all. George Fan, the man who dreamed up the pea shooter, was eventually let go from the company he helped put on the map. Reports surfaced that his departure was linked to his resistance against the pay-to-win direction EA wanted for the sequels and future iterations of the franchise. While EA has denied the direct link, the result remains the same. The soul of the game was evicted to make room for the accountants.
Without its creator, the remastered brand became a ship without a rudder, drifting further into the sea of generic mobile gaming. Even more egregious is the graphical updates seen in recent years. In an attempt to unify the brand with the 3D aesthetics of the Garden Warfare spin-offs, the 2D charm of the original Plants was often discarded. The new designs felt corporate, bubbly, and devoid of the personality that made characters like Crazy Dave icons of the era. The remastering was an act of branding, not preservation. They wanted the game to look like a toy commercial rather than a labor of love. The visual language was simplified until it was unrecognizable, a process of beautification that left the game looking plastic and cheap. The remastered experience also introduced a constant, nagging internet requirement. The original Plants vs. Zombies was the perfect travel companion, something you could play on a plane, in a basement, or anywhere the world couldn't reach you. The new, optimized versions frequently demand a server check-in. They want to make sure your gem count is synchronized, but more importantly, they want to make sure they can serve you an ad the moment you finish a level. A game about defending your home was turned into a game that invited the most intrusive parts of the internet into your private time. When you look at the landscape of modern gaming, remasters are usually celebrated as a way to honor the past. The Last of Us Part 1 or Resident Evil 4 2023 show what happens when a company respects the source material. But Plants vs. Zombies represents the inverse. It is a cautionary tale of demastering. It is what happens when a company views a masterpiece as nothing more than a user acquisition funnel. They didn't just update the resolution, they downgraded the integrity. They took a game that was 100% fun and reduced it to 10% fun and 90% friction.
The legacy of this worst remaster is seen in the state of the sequels. Plants vs. Zombies 2 launched as a bloated, map-based grindfest that locked iconic plants behind paywalls. Plants vs. Zombies 3 has been in a state of soft launch and redesign for years, struggling to find an identity in a market that has largely moved on. By remastering the original into a hollow shell, EA killed the goodwill that would have fueled a 20-year franchise. They traded long-term loyalty for short-term average revenue per user. They burned the garden to sell the ashes. In 2026, looking back at the 2009 original feels like looking at a lost civilization. We remember a time when a remaster meant making something better, not making it more profitable. We remember when a game's success was measured by how many people loved it, not by its retention rate or click-throughs. The original pea shooter still stands in our memories, but the versions available on our phones are shadows of a greater past. They are the toxic truth of the modern gaming industry, a world where nothing is sacred if it can be sold in pieces. Is it the worst remaster ever? In terms of technical failure, perhaps not, but in terms of the delta, the distance between how good the original was and how cynical the update became, it is a prime candidate. It represents the death of the premium indie and the birth of the corporate leviathan. It is a game that was once about the joy of discovery, now remastered into the drudgery of the grind. We are left with a game that looks like Plants vs. Zombies, but doesn't feel like it. The zombies didn't win by eating our brains, they won by buying the company and charging us for the salt. This is the end result of a business-first approach to creativity. When you treat art as an asset to be remastered for maximum extraction, you eventually destroy the asset itself.